See.
Okay, now it looks like
Okay, now it looks like it's recording.
recording. Okay.
All right. So Don has proposed to interview me for posterity.
Well, that's my thought is, why don't you just, I thought something that you could put away for your kids or your grandkids or your great-grandkids, people that don't know you today and might not ever know you, because you can keep it. But why don't you start out, tell me where you were born.
Okay. Way back in history. So I was born in actually Hong Kong. At that time, it was a British Crown colony and part of the British Empire. Now, moving fast forward, I think in the mid-90s, Hong Kong went back to China.
Correct.
So now I would say that I'm born in China.
Right,
on that.
okay.
So depending on who on who you're talking to. So anyhow, I was born in China, and I came over in the let's see, it would be the late 50s, around 1958 or so. I was about 3 years old, and I was adopted, and it was how should I say it? It was sort of an arranged adoption in the sense that my mom wanted a second child. And wanted a boy, I think. I'm not sure
Okay.
on that. And kind of jokingly, I was the third pick because they actually had wanted a child that was basically a brand new newborn, but they couldn't find one. And at that time, I think it was about 2 years old or 3 years old.
Okay.
So jokingly, they had to settle for me. I was not a newborn.
So did they bring you from Hong Kong here?
Well, I came over, I was flown over. I was actually in an orphanage is what it was.
Okay.
And so what I had understood was that they had hired somebody to find a child.
Okay.
And a relative of somehow got involved and said, well, I know this orphanage. I know the people who run it. It was a Catholic orphanage. And so then they, quote, sent a nice little picture of this boy, which was me, and said he would be perfect.
Okay.
And that's kind of how that happened. And then I was flown over with, I think, I know back then when you're a little kid, I think maybe an escort from the orphanage or some type of government agency. And we landed in New York, and my sister tells me that I was crying because it was about winter time, and there was all this weird white stuff falling from the skies, and I didn't know what it was.
Oh, okay.
Otherwise known as snow.
Okay.
So that was my illustrious beginning here in the United States. And my dad at that time lived in what everybody knows as upstate New York.
Okay.
Which was the Albany, Schenectady area, or also known as the tri-state city area.
Tri-Cities area.
Yeah, tri-city areas. And Albany and it still is, was the capital of New York State. So that's where I was raised until, well, let's see, typical until I was probably like 17 or 18 and went to college. And then after college, I stayed in New York City for about 10 years, and then from there moved to Colorado in the late 80s or so, about 86, 87, 88. If my wife was here, she could rattle off all those dates.
Okay.
Type of thing.
So you were born in Hong Kong and adopted here, and so tell me about your adoptive father and mother.
Well, my mom and dad, there was about, I think, 20 years difference. It was kind of like an arranged marriage.
Okay.
Situation. My dad was already here in the United States running restaurants, and one of the cooks from China says, well, I have a daughter in China and looking to marry her off. And the reason why I said it's kind of arranged And some of this is from what my sister told me, was that my mom had experienced some injuries because of World War II when the Japanese invaded China. And part of it was that she had some hearing loss. So it was one of those, like, you know, the cook says, well, she's a wonderful woman, but she has hearing loss and stuff like that. But we think that perhaps with an operation, it would get better. And so my dad said, okay. And so they arranged it so that the two of them were married. And actually, I have an older sister who was also adopted, and there's about seven years difference.
Oh, okay.
On that. So she's 7 years older than I am. So she was first in the family, and then I came second.
So that's why she remembers these things,
Right.
and you don't, because she was
older.
Okay.
And so some of the stuff I'm telling you now was relayed by her. I was basically an unconscious person until probably I was about 8 or 9 years old.
Okay. So your mom came from China to marry your dad as kind of a mail order bride. So
essentially, yes.
Essentially,
yeah.
That sort of a situation. And your dad was here for a long time, or?
Yeah, no, so not so much as me, but if you want to go back, it's really kind of an interesting history, is that my dad was born in 1901.
Okay.
Yeah, in China. And that's, again, that's a little bit weird, but essentially my father came to the United States in, I believe, in the late 20s or early 30s.
Oh, okay.
Is where it is. And he was actually born in mainland China. And in terms of, quote, the different people, because you have like Cantonese people, et cetera, he came from an area that was known as Hakka.
Okay.
In China. And he had wanted to actually leave China. So he was like a lot of immigrants in countries that were not like America.
Right.
So what he did was, when he moved from his village, he moved to a seaside village, and he learned how to swim.
Okay.
And so after X amount of period of time, he decided it was time to leave China. He had found a, quote, right-sized log that he could use as a floating device.
Okay.
And so what he did then is that literally in the middle of the night, he took out his log lifesaver and swam across the channel or the ocean into Hong Kong.
Okay. From Macau. Yeah.
I don't know if it was Macau or, he never would tell us exactly which part of the China coast, but it was a situation where he had to learn how to swim, et cetera,
okay,
get himself to the point. And so then he landed in Hong Kong, and this, I believe, was probably when he was a teenager.
Okay.
On that. So anyhow, he ended up being able to work on a ship, become essentially a merchant marine.
Right.
The first few times he was not successful, but then he was able to go ahead and get on a ship and was able to travel all over the world. Now, back in that time period, in those type of ships, I'm going to use the word, Chinese people were sort of expendable people.
Yes.
On that. And so he was telling us on one voyage, the cargo was zoo animals. And I think it was like a lion or a tiger, not bears, sorry, that got loose in the lower hull. So they had to get him back in the cage. So they sent my dad down there as live bait.
Okay.
And basically said, okay, so we need you to run, quote, that away, and we will pull you up or get you out of the way before the tiger
gets to you.
And it was really kind of funny. So we're listening to it, like, oh, well, what did you do? He goes, well, you do what you're told. And So I go to the area that they thought the tiger was, and I hear tiger. I turn around and run very, very quick. And they pulled me up, so I was okay. We caught tiger, you know. And but one of the things that he did learn while on the ship was learn how to cook, because I'm sure in his mind he says, I don't want to be bait every single time.
Okay.
And he figured that was probably one of the things he could learn how to do, and hopefully they wouldn't throw him back under to maintain order in the cages or anything like that. So anyhow, fast forward, he had landed in the United States. The first time was in Long Beach, where he basically tried to jump ship so he could stay in the United States. That was not successful, so he got caught and got thrown back
on the ship.
And then I think it was a couple years later in Texas. I think it was, is there a Port Henry in Texas? Okay, so in Port Henry, that was his second attempt, and he had made friends with the security guard that was in the Port Henry, and he was a cook. So, you know, on a regular basis, while the ship was in port, I guess is
Right.
what it is, he would go down on a regular basis to buy fresh produce and whatever the case was. And so one day when he went down, he told the guard as usual, okay, I'm gonna go shopping. And the guard, they had become friends, says, well, now you're not gonna try to get away, are you, Jack? You're gonna come back. And he said, oh yeah. So he went around the corner to buy groceries and stuff. And it just so happened it was near a Greyhound bus station. And as he said, he goes, so I go down the ship to buy food for the ship. So I go around the corner where grocery is, and all of a sudden bus pulls up. I look, I have this here, this money, or I have this food, I have 50 cents. I look at the food, I look at the 50 cents, I look at the bus, I go towards the bus. And that's how he got in the United States. So from there, if you want to call it sort of like the Underground Railroad,
right?
But for the Chinese, he went straight north, and I don't remember exactly where. It could have been, you know, Arizona or something, but went up, and then he went east to New York State.
Okay.
And he landed in New York City. And that's and then there's a whole bunch of other story, but one of the things that he did tell us was that he was in New York City cooking. One day there was immigration people that came, and everybody in that restaurant, like, all of a sudden just split, trying to get away from immigration. And he's cooking, and he's basically saying, you know, because he knew he could get caught. And so an immigration officer came in and said, hey, you Chinaman, turn around. And my dad's cooking, and the guy said, you know, what are you, deaf or something? And my dad finally turned around and said, what's wrong? I'm cooking. He goes, let me see your papers. And my dad looked at him and goes, let me see yours. And the guy was like floored and go, well, I don't have to. I'm a United States citizen. I am too. And the guy says, all right, you got me, but I'm going to come back. And so my dad went back in cooking, and as soon as he left, he says, then I got out of there. I jumped on the rooftops and ran like everybody else. And that's when he decided that he wanted to run his own business, but he had to get away from New York City because their immigration was very strong, because there were a lot of illegal immigrants in that area. So then he decided to go to, and this is where I got mixed up until I had clarity, there's also Port Henry in New York State up north, near the border of Canada and the United States. It was another name, I think, but he called it Port Henry also.
Okay.
So, and it could have been, and maybe the name has changed or whatever. And there, that's when he got help from a person who ran a restaurant, and that's where my dad also learned. It was a French restaurant, and that's where he learned to cook French food and everything else. And then after a few years, he goes, I really want go back down and find a place and start. And that's when he moved back down to the Albany, Schenectady area. Albany, Schenectady is about 150 miles due north of New York City.
Right.
And where he was, it was also about 150 miles just from Albany, Schenectady was north, this Port Henry area. So when you look at it, sort of like, this is New York City, this is Albany, Schenectady, and this is, quote, Port Henry in New York State.
Okay.
So he decided to move back down to the middle area. And that's where the Hudson and the Mohawk, if you're from New York State, you know the Hudson and Mohawk. The way I describe it is New York is kind of like this, and then it's a T that fell over.
Right.
Is the way I explain it. And where the T is kind of where Albany is connected. So that's how we started in the restaurant business. And during that time period is when the arrangement for my dad to be married. So diverging, I know he wanted to know, Don wants to know a little bit about my history, but kind of have to hold. So my mom came over, and she was actually a citizen of the United States before my dad ever was of the United States. And that had to do with, the phrase we use is paper wives.
Okay.
I don't know if you're used, and I may be using the wrong expression, but essentially what that meant was back in China, the Chinese people who helped the United States during World War II, the fight against the Japanese and
Right.
all that, they were given papers to say that you were an American citizen.
Oh,
So
I didn't realize that.
So what happened is that each person that helped the United States was given papers that would, I think they said that would have up to 6 people, I think, in a family would all be U.S. citizens.
Okay.
So, I mean, it's a little hazy. I don't know the whole history, but this is what my sister and my dad. So she found a couple that didn't have that many children. And guess what? They were willing to sell their paper.
To her.
Yeah, to say that she was part of the family.
Oh, okay.
So that's why they call them paper wives
Okay.
on that.
So this was in China.
This was in China.
In China, somebody effectively adopted her so she could have the paperwork to come to the U.S. as a citizen
Right.
and get through the immigration process. So that got her into the country. And then once she married your dad, that gave him an in.
No. The quote, the immunity didn't go that far.
Oh.
She was a United States citizen
Okay.
because of, and you have to go back in the U.S. history. That could be even a longer conversation. And we had actually talked about this